let me tell you about this idea I have to dye all dogs purple. People's like, that's weird. Hell no, this is a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. In Facebook, there's probably a group of people that are like, I had the same idea, right? And they go find ads that are like, hey, do you like dyeing dogs purple? Because T-Mobile has a plan for you.
Come on, Benny, man. The kid is a L7 Weenie.
Well,
we'll
okay. Start all over again.
Yeah.
So as a quick recap.
As a quick recap, I'm incompetent when it comes to technological devices. Just another thing, that's why I keep the screen moved, but I couldn't see that if the damn red light was on, so.
Lay down.
Oh well. Y'all just missed like a good 6 minutes of content. It was kind of good too. We were talking about
ethical watching.
Sharing streaming services.
Ethical streaming, sharing.
That would have been a good clip. Damn. See, this is why I don't like. I'm like, if I'm gonna, find like, let's just get it running as soon as you get in here, because I want to capture everything. Because that always happens.
Right.
It'll be like, oh damn, I wish I had that on screen now. It's like nothing will be as good as it.
I mean, we can recap a little bit for them. So you're watching shows and you're sharing accounts,
and random stuff pops up on your recents. Basically.
We're rebels against Amazon Prime's algorithms. It's like the new battle in Terminator against.
No, here we go. Imperial algorithm, because it's so overwhelming.
It's the algorithm.
Yeah.
I feel like that was the plot of a show or something.
A world being consumed by an algorithm?
Yeah, like an algorithm was like driving like the narrative that was like, we're fighting. Oh, it's like in Westworld.
That makes sense. I still haven't watched that.
It's like weird, right? Because in like Westworld season 3, everything like changes up, right? So the first 2 seasons are like, hey, there's this Western area where people go in and people pay to like have a VR experience and do whatever they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Season 3, the robots get out, right? And you think this is all going to be about robots and their beef with humanity. It comes to find out there's some degree of some computer algorithm that's predicting out what people will do for the rest of their life. Like, it's pretty much figured out the world.
Okay.
And the robots are rebelling against that, I guess, or somewhat. But it's like, to some degree, the computer kind of sees them coming. And I honestly fear that's where Amazon Prime is going.
Like surrogates, that's the next thing from Amazon?
It's going to be like, from the minute Cooper starts watching Sesame Street, we've predicted out when he's going to want to watch some new TV show.
I'm sure there's data on that, though. There's probably data. Because I looked at told you that last time I watched the documentary on how they just got into collecting data very early on, which led to their success and everything. I'm sure they have data on, like, okay, let's say people who watch Game of Thrones, right? By the time, if they go back and start, like, our data from 2017, like, when we had all those people going back and watching Game of Thrones, our data shows that if a person starts watching Game of Thrones from the beginning, by season 2, episode 1, or season 2, episode 3, they're gonna branch off to one of these 3 shows, while also still watching this. So it will be a good time to start feeding them these kinds of advertisements or whatever.
It's like a weird Hansel and Gretel of like TV shows, because it's like breadcrumbing your trail. Like, which way do they go after the Red Wedding? Like, do they go more to The Witcher, or are they more into Vikings? Like, where do they go? This is we all want to know. And it's like, sometimes you got to switch it up. That's when you got to throw in a mixture. You got to throw in like the 5 heartbeats and just mess them up. And thankfully, that's why I feel like sharing my account kind of does. It keeps it new, right? So like, I don't know.
And I like that though, because like, when I am on Instagram or like Facebook or stuff, I'll only interact with like a certain couple of things. But then that tells the algorithm will just show them those things. It's like, well, I don't necessarily just want to see those things. So it's like, it's to the point to where they're learning your behavior, which is cool, so they can show you what they want to show you, but then you don't get to see things that you might also like.
See, that I think that's like the downside of where this is all going with like social media and like just data in general, right? Like, I love data. I think data is useful as a tool. It's also can be dangerous if, like for Facebook, if you searched, so I guess to back up a little bit, if you had some really crazy thought in your mind, right? Like you were like, I like dyeing dogs purple. That's my deal, right? People normally, if you were just out and about, right? And you were like, hey man, let me tell you about this idea I have to dye all dogs purple. People are like, that's weird. Hell no, this is a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. In Facebook, there's probably a group of people that are like, I had the same idea, right? And they go find ads that are like, hey, do you like dyeing dogs purple? Because T-Mobile has a plan for you, right? And they just feed it to where this becomes very normalized, right? Mm-hmm. And those people are walking around in groups and they're like, there's a bunch of us. Right. We're not the problem. You're the problem because you don't want to die. And it's the hunger monster, you know?
That's a good, my vocabulary is turning into shit.
It's all good. It's early on Sunday.
But I'm like, that's just a good, not perspective, observation. There it goes. Right. That's a good observation because that could be leading to a lot of the whole like civil unrest and everything too. Because a lot of things become normalized because of your feed. Right. So you get insulated into some type of bubble of thinking, whether it's the whole racial injustice or dyeing dogs purple or just people only care about the NBA, not the NFL. You know,
if you're the type of person that thinks the players should just play basketball, right? Yeah, or athletes should just do sports, there's a high likability that what's going on here is that you're actually being fed more articles that support that. The groups are kind of supporting that. You're in groups and small groups, and now Facebook is really pushing like their group dynamic things or small groups where there's a group for everything. Mm-hmm. And every time I watch that commercial, there's a commercial with I think it's like a ukulele or something, or a kazoo. It's like a kazoo, and they're like, this lady's like walking around playing the kazoo, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's probably good for a commercial. It's gonna suck in real life because people are gonna be like, no one should actually play the kazoo that long or something like that, right? But it's what leads those groups. I could see like a road group being like, the election is about whether Joe Biden or Donald Trump supports kazoo playing. Like, kazoo should be classified as a classical instrument. It's been around forever. Like, this is what we should do. And they're just being fed more kazooisms, you know?
So how much would you say the internet is an echo chamber? Or
in
rather,
that
social
sense,
media is an echo chamber?
I think that's the crazy thing, right? Like, so I wonder if the people that created the internet, the leading scientists, I imagine this is like NASA's greatest brains have come up with the internet, right? They're like, it's going to be so much information out there. You can learn everything. And I think that's a very like lateral way to look at it. Like, oh, let me learn about math. Let me also learn about science. Let me learn about literature and famous architects and blah, 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 blah. Instead, people just get onto like one thing and learn all about that one thing, right? And they get, and because there's so much cross information out there, right? There's people that are giving really bad information about it. So then it's like, well, you'll have people out there that are like, I looked it up on the internet, man. Pyramids came from Mars, right?
And that is like a catch-all, right, for just the supreme intelligence. I saw it on the internet.
Right.
It's pretty legit.
I mean, it had 10,000 followers.
No, because I wrote a joke like that, though, for my comic, where he's like talking about, he's like, hey, man, like, you shouldn't stay up like that, because people who don't get a lot of sleep, like, their balls end up shrinking. And it's like, there's an actual, study on that, but his like backing up of it is like his proof rather is like, I saw a dude talk about it on a TED Talk,
Right.
and it had like 83,000 views.
Right.
He was wearing a tucked shirt. He had on khakis.
No, but I mean,
pretty
like,
sure this is what's happening.
I feel like, so there's an avenue where I grew up in Atlantic City called like Atlantic Avenue, where everyone has like street sales, right?
Okay.
They're like street vendors selling all different types of stuff, right?
Like Jamaica Ave, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. So like vendors, goods, all this stuff, right? And as much as you're like a kid, maybe in like middle school, maybe elementary school, and maybe this doesn't dawn on you in the early 90s, that yeah, if they're selling Gucci at this table, it's probably not real Gucci.
Yeah.
But at the time you're like, man, this is Gucci. Same thing with like movies and videos and stuff like that, which is like a very culturally driven thing about Atlantic City, New Jersey, right? It's like this, that's a part of Atlantic City. It's like this avenue. This is kind of where you learn a lot of stuff about Atlantic City.
Atlantic Ave. It's called Atlantic Avenue. Okay.
It's on Atlantic Ave, and there used to be so many vendors, like all up and down the street, selling anything from like oils, incense, movies, like mixtapes, all this stuff, right?
Things with high yield earnings, basically.
Maybe, not really.
I mean,
I gotta wonder if they're selling like 3 movies for like $10 or $20, right? Is it really that profitable? Like,
I mean, so what? Let's just assume they're DVDs. How much is like a pack of those? Like you should get like 120 in a
right,
case.
but then you got to get the cases, and then you got to do the copies for the inserts, because people they understand. As you get older, you're like, but this doesn't look like Back to the Future, right? And it's like, well, it doesn't look like Back to the Future because it's in fact not Back to the Future, but we wanted it to look as legit as possible, right? So I think what's happened in terms of the internet is where I expected something more like the Smithsonian's, right? What you ended up with was much more of like the Atlantic Avenue side of things, right? And what that ends out to be is like, you could go onto the internet right now and be like, oh, I want to create my own research journal and then publish my own badly written article that says this thing. 20 years from now, some kid is going to find that and be like, some research study said dyeing dogs purple leads to less cancer in the world. Everyone should do this. And you're going to be like, no, that's a horrible idea, because these things aren't as well vetted out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like when people started telling me about the dark net. I was like, wait a minute.
The dark web, yeah.
The dark web, right? They're like, no, there's like 90% of the internet is in the dark web, right? And I was like, wait a minute, I'm only seeing the top 10%? the top 10% is this. And I don't even want to go down into the dark web. Who knows what's down there?
I was watching this show called Letterkenny. You ever look at that?
Mm-mm.
It's pretty funny. You should like, I can recommend the first 2-3 seasons. I haven't seen the rest, but I mean, like, cause you never know with shows like that. It's like, oh, the first 2-3 seasons are legit, but then it's like, I mean, we all know what happened with Game of Thrones.
Right.
So, you know, so it's like, you wouldn't go around talking about Game of Thrones the same if you were, if now you had the bigger picture. Anyways, on the show, they have like a episode or 2 that cover the dark web, because they're like trying to get this, they like make a deal with some guy to get a laptop, they can access it, and then they're just on it like all day, because it's just so, you know, like whatever the hell's on there. So I was like, you know, like, for like, you know, you get these ideas for like a good strong 20 minutes. Oh, I'm going to get access to the dark web. Then, you know, you kind of just wander off into some other, you know, thing to keep your attention. But yeah, it was like, it seems like a place where you're like, it's basically like, from what I understand, it's like what was going on back in Pirates times, where it's just this lawless land. You know, it's like everything that you know about the internet times 100. From what I understand. So, like, there's so much, there's like an eBay for like the worst kinds of shits, and it's, I don't know. It's just, like, it's fascinating, really.
Who do you think, like, do you think someone, and this is probably the darker side of the dying dogs purple thing, right? It's like there's some guy out there, or some lady, or somebody, right? That's like,
you know, give everyone a chance.
You know what's wrong with eBay? It's too nice, right? We need a darker eBay. Call it Dark Bay, right? And in Dark Bay, we're going to sell the craziest things that you can imagine. And it's like, that guy probably doesn't need access to the internet, you know?
that's something in by itself. Certain people don't need access to the internet. There's a whole, you know, rights and they get tied up in that, but it's like some people should probably lose their internet privileges. There's Twitter jail for a reason, you know.
I mean, I would say in a lot of regards, I'm probably more libertarian in that I believe like you don't need that much regulation for a lot of things. Unfortunately, I do have a respectful line that says, well, it's just not my job to regulate you, right? It's somebody else needs to come in here and come up with some guidelines for how this should go. And I think that's what you're seeing now with like Facebook and like fake news and all this stuff, right? Is that people, the underlying idea for Americans is that Facebook or their customers, their clients, users would demand better practices from Facebook. But Facebook is also $1 billion customer that people miscorrectly place who's in control of what, right?
Yeah.
But Facebook, they're like, you're not my client. Horizon's my client.
I watched like a documentary on that, the whole like as far as Facebook's responsibility with information and how their users use the platform. I forget what the conclusion was. I think what it was is it was a 2-part series, and I didn't watch the second part.
Stop.
But they have done like a whole thing on just how like just, you know, what's possible through this platform, even though it's just like, oh, we just put up that basketball court for you to play basketball. We didn't think we were gonna come back 2 days later and y'all had like a whole, you know, all this going on. Like there's a volleyball court there. You're barbecuing on the basketball court. You know, like it was like we wanted you to play basketball. Why are you doing all these different things?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. It is a strange world to be in where Facebook, who I remember when Facebook came out, turned into like what it is now. And you're like, well, I thought it was just like posting up a picture and finding out who went to schools. And what's going on in UGA, you know? And that was like the most fantastical point of it, was like, what's going on over there? Now it's become like this. I don't think people know how to share photos anymore unless they use Facebook or Instagram, right? Likewise, I don't think people know how to communicate with people to a certain degree unless it's on Facebook or like, oh yeah, well it's posted on social media or something.
And you know? Like, so you know that video I was watching when I was walking in here, on Jordan Belfort, it was talking about tonality and body language. Like just, you know, good habits on selling and stuff like that. Because when I go to the convention, I want to, of course, maximize my results. And like with that,
Jordan Belfort is where you're taking lessons from, though.
I mean, I'm taking lessons from YouTube, but if we want to be, you know, if we want to just be straight up about it, it's, you know, the knowledge I'm gaining from YouTube. But I mean, those are all good, strong points and things to be cognitive. Like I'm not like having like I've sold before without having to listen to Jordan Belfort. I'm just like, what do you have to say? Like taking this so I can do even better. You know, there's something to be gained from that. So
that's a very powerful point of the internet, though.
And I was like thinking as far as like I try not to get too like, oh, I'm gonna talk about this, talk about that, because I just want to see where it goes. But it's something as I was watching that, as I was getting out of the car, I was like, you know, I wonder what Cary, like someone who works at a university, Georgia State, what are y'all, Panthers?
Go Panthers.
Go Panthers. But like I wonder how you feel about things such as YouTube being such a platform for gaining knowledge, free knowledge, because that's become such a big trend too. People who want to give away free knowledge on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad. I actually think much of like how we were talking about before. I think there's a lot of challenges that come around when it's I'm supposed to teach you, right? There's a lot of trust in that relationship that I know what I'm talking about, and that given your value that you're looking for, you've come to me and said, I think I'll get the most value from you by learning from you, right? To a certain degree, there's still a place in higher ed, in college or post-secondary training, or these institutions, let's say that, institutions that are saying, we have a lot of experts that can teach you all these things, right?
Yeah.
But if you want more than that, or more specifically about this thing or that stuff, or stuff that you're not getting from the institution, go on to YouTube. I go on to YouTube all the time. I'm like watching YouTube videos on product reviews, right?
Right.
Because I used to just ask my friends, do you know about this random thing, right? And if they didn't know, then maybe I don't know. Right. But now I can go on and find the dying dog's purple person and be like, these are things to consider when dying dog's blue, right?
And it's like, it does create a lot of experts on what they do, because like you said, you used to just ask a friend or someone you know who more than likely knows 20% of what the other person does on YouTube. So it's like, it's like I can go to these experts, and it's free. It's in a video format versus having to, actually. I
think the challenge is, though, is like, for a lot of people, I think education itself used to be much more about math, English, history,
science,
the sciences, stuff like that, right? And I think as time goes along, we're finding out science is very much more complicated than what people think it is, right? Math, maybe not so much if you can use a calculator. And what is the usefulness of that calculator? Is the purpose of me being able to replicate what the calculator can do? Or is the purpose of that me being able to utilize the calculator to do the thing that needs to get done, right? I'm going to come back to that in a second. History and like political science, these things, we're now finding out from a very social justice standpoint, maybe we weren't told everything that's been going on here for so long.
A lot of whiteouts.
Right.
Not to, say it like that, but it's like, a lot of things have been omitted from the books.
Right. I once took a really horrible class on European history, right? and like, when it came to like Germany, I think someone was telling me, and it wasn't my class, but somebody in this class was telling me when they were looking at a study abroad in Germany or something, they got to like World War II and then just skipped ahead a bit, right? And they were like, so pre and then post, and you're like, well, what about in the middle? We don't really,
When was this?
This was a long time ago.
I'm about to say, because there's a Family Guy sketch where they like straight up did that. Like they were, Stewie and Brian were like on some tour, and like the dude was like saying he was doing all these like history things, and they were like, you can't just skip over that. Like there was a whole,
just go
and he went off on him. He's like, nothing bad happened.
Well, I mean, if you think about that, right? Like, there's many different kind of things going on now, which are like about teaching the full curriculum or the full perspective. Unfortunately, I think this also gets incredibly skewed to just African American history, but Native Americans as well are owed a whole lot of justice in terms of contextualizing what happened here, right? And Asian Americans with the things that happen with Asian Americans and like California and the West Coast and stuff like that, and just the historical nuances. There's a lot of things that have happened to other races that haven't been brought into American history, which is crazy, right? So I think people are awakening to that and saying, well, you're not telling me the whole deal. You're telling me like one sliver of it, right? And then testing me on my ability to know those aspects of that.
Speaking on the effects of the internet, that might be like somewhat of the catalyst for that, because people have realized that a lot of people have their own little funnels, and it doesn't give a full picture. And it's like they start realizing, well, that might be the case for this stuff too.
I think it's like when someone says, well, like, up until this point, this, and then we skipped ahead a little bit, right? People are like, well, what happened at that one thing? And the beauty of things like YouTube is like, you look up that one term, and it starts feeding you a bunch of things.
Like
you're like,
and videos on it, yeah.
Now, me as someone that, my undergrad was in econ and philosophy, right? So the philosophical side teaches you a lot of things that don't immediately seem like they're that important, right? Like while you're studying it, you're like, man, this is a lot of concentration on logical sentence structure, right? Or what this actually means when you read that. And then now applying that to very difficult degrees of context or text, right? And now I think that's even probably more critical, right? For a lot more people, because econ gave me a lot of the inquisitive nature of like trying to search things down, right? But philosophy gave me a lot of things that were like, nah, that's not what that says. Like they said A, not the, you know? Or why, when I hear this random person on YouTube talk, there are things that they're saying that tell me they're not an expert in this. I should not regard this as very highly valued, right? I need to keep searching for other things. And I think that's probably going to be a much more critical thing. There's an article that recently came out on CNN that was talking about, it said 39 children were recovered from a trailer in Georgia. How is this not the biggest news of 2020? And it was like this like conspiracy theory stuff about, you know, maybe child sex trafficking or something like that. And then CNN did a really deep dive on this that said it wasn't the biggest story because that's not what happened. It was, yes, some kids were recovered from bad situations across the nation. It was like, it's much more layered than this, and it wasn't that they were in some trailer. It wasn't that it was sex trafficking. Some of these kids were just runaways. Other kids weren't missing at all, you know? And it was like all these things kind of going on with that, right? That CNN was saying it spread like wildfire, and it's because a lot of people couldn't read that posting and apply the critical thinking skills to be like, maybe this isn't what's going on here, right?
Right.
And maybe I shouldn't immediately share this out. I don't know how to search this down and verify it. Now what we're turning into is people that are waiting for Twitter to verify something, or is this like you're waiting for Facebook or somebody to slap a fake news or maybe manipulated media posting on it?
Yeah.
And it's like, so now we're kind of relying on the people that let that person post it to tell you if this is also maybe not as right, which is weird to begin with, right? So I think in the place of like how YouTube and all these other things come in, yeah, there's a lot of usefulness in having those repositories of information out there. I mean, think to yourself, as you're putting together media, right? If you wanted to learn about media 30 years ago, right? You would say, hey man, the best place I can go is the best school that I can get into.
Right.
And maybe they have a really good professor of media, production, video, stuff like that, right? But it's still the best for which you could get to. Now, you can go on YouTube or Stanford's university's website or NYU and see the lectures from some of their best professors. So it's not that that professor might be better, he's just different, it's a different perspective. And you can get more exposed to those things, which is great, you know? It's democratizing that education.
Yeah, it's there's this dude named Cary V. You ever hear about him? All right, he's somewhat of like what they call the YouTube gurus or whatever, dealing with just motivating people and stuff like that. Anyways, he says something related to this when dealing with people who are afraid to post about themselves or their business on the internet because it might not get any likes or anything. And basically saying it's like, oh, I don't want to be on social media. There's a lot of bad stuff on social media. He's like, there's nothing wrong with social media. It's the people. Okay? It's like people are fucked up. Facebook and Twitter are fucked up. It's what people are doing. This is just showing who people are.
Right.
And just thinking back on, like, all about just things we've touched on, and just about the advances that, you know, people gain access to these things and then what they do with them. And it's like, I think people like being in echo chambers. They like, you know,
it's confirmation bias.
Yeah, so it's like, it's really just, it's been, the internet is basically the world's, like, there's this thing in DC Comics, like, the Infinite book, it has all this knowledge on it, right? Like, everything you would ever know. It's probably in a bunch of different kinds of fiction. But it's basically everything you would want to know about the world, maybe even more, right?
Right, maybe more.
And this, we've had it for like, what, 20, like my whole lifetime, basically. And it's like, what have we done with it? You know, it's like, it's clearly not the platform, the engine itself. It's the driver of the car. And it's like, that's just, like, I don't have a point. I just find that interesting.
Well, I mean, I think it's also, I don't know about Gary V, but I've heard of very, very much like futurists and people that have said, you know, humans are becoming much more like androids because of the internet. Like, where you have unlimited tap information, right? So when The Matrix first came out, right, and she's like, how do I fly a helicopter? Okay, I know how to do that, right?
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
It's just slower.
It's like becoming a thing, right?
Yeah.
Where, I think there was an article a long, crazy long time ago about this guy who had to emergency land a plane, and he was like, well, I did it in a flight simulator before, so I kind of knew how to do it, right? And it's like, yeah. These things, like, the technology, the stuff that's out there, right? If you wanted to be like, you could be in the middle of a very deep conversation with someone, and if you could open your phone to Google, you could probably get up to speed very quickly with things, as long as you have the critical thinking skills, right?
Right.
To be able to handle that and be able to process and be like, okay, what do I need to know about, you know, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, in weird ways, it's the new kind of era, right? There's still this thing though, right? Like, until we come up with, the thing that I'm going to be most impressed for is, until we come up with like new colors, right? Then it doesn't matter. It's not, you're not going to innovate anything until someone comes up and they're like, it's Orpal. And you're like, what is that? Oh, it's a new color we created. That's a huge innovation, right? What we're really doing now is kind of filling out the edges of the known knowledge that's out there and getting more people into those cracks and crevices of information that was already existed, right? So it's going to be interesting. It is interesting because I oftentimes phrase stuff to my team at Georgia State as like, this is like new math, right? Like, it probably is solvable. We have to learn a new way of using the tools we have to do this better, right? But it's not inventing anything new, right? Inventing something new is like Oracle.
Right, and it's like, but I mean, I think that's really I think that's what's so satisfying about an invention. It takes things that already existed and turns it into something new.
Right.
You know, it's, so yeah, it's a lot of retreading, but like the iPhone is nothing new. Like, it's just a phone and a camera,
right,
in the same thing. That it also plays music.
But I mean, I guess what I mean is like, if I were to think back, would I be more impressed as in my human existence, right, as being someone that's impressed by we took a cell phone and we made it better, right? Or the idea of like, there was nothing and we created a phone, right? And it's like,
well,
whoa,
but even then, they had telegrams, right?
Right. So then back it up even more.
So it it had a progression.
Right.
It just like, their iPhone 1 to iPhone 2 was like writing a letter, like the post system and stuff. So there is a progression. So at what point is it really, because even radio was like
someone had to discover, but then imagine the point when someone discovered radio waves, right? And was like,
so yeah, that's really like, you gotta go back to like Einstein and stuff like that, where they're like they're dropping like laws, scientific laws, and that's really the what the fuck moment,
It's like, whoa. So wait a minute, you're saying that thing in the sky that comes up and goes down, that's the center of the universe?
Yeah.
We're moving, they're not moving? Yeah. What is that all about? And then someone to prove that to you. It's like, what? But I imagine you still see this today sometimes with colorblind people that get those new glasses, and then all of a sudden they see like colors, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like crying and all that. I gotta imagine that's what like new.
Yeah, that massive jump.
It's like, oh my God, you said blue. I never knew it was like that.
I'm trying to think, what's the closest experience I've had to that? I'm like, and my mind went to probably when you went from a cartridge game to a disc game. I was like, that's probably, to like, and you push this button and it just goes in. Okay, wow, so, okay, that's probably the biggest jump in technology I've experienced.
No, I think I remember life before the computer, right? Mm-hmm. Like, before the personal computer was, like, readily available. I remember when my parents brought home a computer, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what this does, but I know this is, like, major, right? And at the time, getting on the internet through, like, America Online and, like trying to just, like, sign on.
I take that so much for granted now.
And but it's like, I remember going through the internet for a very different purpose than just to be on the internet, right?
Right. You didn't live there. Right. It was like task. It was very task.
It was like, it wasn't very task oriented, right? Because people used to go into chat rooms and like.
I didn't do that.
They would just like talk to people, but it was like fascinating. Like, I'm talking to you. You're in California. Oh my God, we're having a conversation. What time is it there? I know how time zones work. Yes, but yes, you're there. I'm here. We're talking together in the same digital room. This is crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And imagining where this was going, I think growing up through that was like, now the internet could do this. Now the internet could do that. And now you can do this on the internet. And it was like, wait a minute. I no longer need an almanac. And people were like, I no longer need the AAA roadmap book. No, because you can just go on MapQuest and download the directions. What?
There's you know who Carl Pilkington is? Mm-mm. Ricky Gervais?
Yes.
Okay, so Carl Pilkington is a friend of Ricky Gervais, and basically they used to do a podcast, Ricky and Stephen Merchant, with Carl Pilkington, because like Carl was a producer at their radio show, and they started talking to him. And
is this the guy where they send like? Is this the one where they send him like on crazy?
Yeah, that's the guy. Yeah. So they just found him a fascinating person, his perspective and outlook on the world. So
because he was so closed-minded.
Yeah, he's very
small
he's very down to earth and simple. But he has these little gems in there though. That's the thing about it. When he talks long enough, and then it's like, that's kind of a good point, So, and then there's a bunch of just silly shit around it. But he was saying it's like, he was trying to articulate basically how people were becoming dependent on technology.
Yeah. And
he was doing it in a very silly way. But he was saying like, I don't want to have a sat nav, a GPS, because it's like, am I thinking or is the phone thinking?
Right.
And he's like, he would just have a way of explaining it that make you go, the fuck are you talking about? Yeah. But it's like, that's a good point. It's like, do you know the knowledge or does the phone know the knowledge? It's like, what do I actually know? Like, I can't get to that place because I always use the phone to get to that place.
Right. But I mean, that's like what I was saying about like the math and the calculator, right? Like, what is the point of this? Is the point of it because like to some degrees, like we with Cooper, my son, right? We're like, oh, we don't want him to be on screens all the time, and we don't want to do these things. We watched Cooper yesterday playing on YouTube, watching videos on YouTube, and he like very clearly hit pause, went to the next.
He knows how to navigate.
Went to the next video, skipped ads on it, and I was like, whoa, like he's like scary up to speed with like how this works, right? But again, maybe that's a different type of knowledge that those kids will need now, right? Like I could imagine growing up in farm times, like big farm times, pre-car, right? And it's like, I don't want to learn how to drive a car. Like this is, it's so much. That's become pretty normal, standardized knowledge for a lot of people, right? Is how to operate a motor vehicle, right?
Right.
Soon enough, one day, it could be, you don't know how to pilot a space shuttle? Man, what's wrong with you, right? Like, who doesn't know how to do this? And that could just be the evolution of, like, what you're talking about.
What time is it?
It is 12:15.
Okay. Been going. But I was going to say,
Is it still going? It's still going.
Yeah, it's got like an hour and some change on it, so.
Okay.
But, I was just thinking of, like, I wonder what would be a better class then. Is it better to know how to do math? Like, after a certain point, you know? Like, is it better to know how to do math? Or is it better to know how to build and fix a calculator?
Well, I mean, those are very valid questions, right? I think it's both, right? I think there's a third thing in there, too, right? It really depends on who do you want to be as a person, right? If you are looking for more down-to-earth terms of things, or if you never want to be in a realm where you have to use new math, right? Then maybe you don't need the math principles of those, like how to do big math, right? Like big, huge law dynamics. How does math function? You know, I can't even wrap my mind around those major questions, but I know there's mathematicians out there. They're like, I changed the way math works, right? Right? You don't maybe need to know all that if you don't want to do that type of work. If the end of or the results that you're looking for in your career are like, yeah, not a question I'm interested in. I actually just want to do the calculator parts, right? Then maybe you need to understand how the calculator works and how to know when the calculator's malfunctioning, right? And why, right? And then from there, it's like taking off from there.
I guess I just feel like you're building a smarter generation if you're not teaching them like just simple math through grammar school versus, they know how to make their own calculators and then use that to do math.
Right.
You know, it's just creating a more, like you said, it's building that critical thinking gene.
Right.
And versus more so just letting information go through you.
Right. I think the challenge that we're running into now, though, with people or with some people is that they've been taught how to use a calculator, but not when the calculator goes wrong.
Right.
And they're like, well, it said 4. Well, it said 4 because you put in the wrong equation. No, I didn't. I put it in the way I saw it on YouTube. No, you missed a step.
Yeah.
I know you missed a step because I know how math works, right? That's the point of why I know math, right?
Right.
Now, how much should we be testing people on this ability is some degree that bigger minds are going to have to figure out, right? But it's a valid question.
You know what another valid question is? Like, who are these bigger minds? You know, like, because I've always thought about that, like, that's for someone else to do. And it's like, but then I look at stuff on, like, you know, news and everything. It's like, I think these are the people I was talking about just now. And it's like, do I think they're capable of it? Like, even if it's like whether or not they are, I don't feel comfortable saying, he knows what to do.
I don't know. I feel fairly comfortable in many situations like that, right? Like, I'm riding in an airplane. I don't think to myself, like, I should know how a plane works.
All right.
right? No, bigger minds have figured out how aviation functions. I don't need to know how it goes and like when.
I guess like engineering and stuff like that, like the cars and stuff like that. I'm talking more so about all that stuff that happens in the gray area. What you should and should not be learning, you know.
Yeah.
Now, you know,
those things, I think the challenge with those are very different because like what I slickly did there was I referred to like sciencey things, right? Like a doctor.
Something a lot more concrete.
Like,
yeah.
Either it bleeds or it does not bleed. You know?
Yeah.
For the other stuff, which is for a long time, I really do feel like a lot of people put so much value in the concrete stuff, right? And not enough emphasis on the gray area. The like, what counts as history? What is art? Why is art valuable? And to a certain extent, you can see this now when people are saying that's not worthy. That's not a worthy inclusion in education. Mm-hmm. I'm not paying for you to go to school to get into drawing things, right? But these things matter, right?
It adds value.
It adds a lot of value because there's a lot to be learned in drawing. There's a lot to be learned in understanding history, right? Those are very more agile things in that you have to bring in more voices to see what lifts off, right? But more voices that are about the philosophical, what is the value of history? Not as what is the value of my history or this history. But in general, why do we care about history? And then chasing that back from there.
Circling back around, this is why Amazon's busting ass.
Right.
Because they have the data on all of that stuff. And it helps them navigate it to where, like, it helps all these industries, all that data, all that history, all that information is why Cooper, a 2-year-old, can engage YouTube as skillfully as a grown person.
I don't know. I think what we're saying is, I think it's much more of like, imagine like a table, right? This may not work. It may work perfectly. I don't know. So imagine a table and there's a cup, right?
I like how you just had a disclaimer for your example. You know, this might be...
I don't know. We're going to try this plan. We're going to play this out. So imagine a table, right? And there's a cup on the table and someone says, what is this cup? And this cup is analytics, right? And you're like, what is analytics? And they're like, oh, it's the data, it's the research behind, it's the science behind. And you're like, oh my God, this is a field that I think had existed before. We used to think of it as like surveys, right? And like anecdotal information, but this is much more scientific in nature about it. That's great, right? Now, what we've started to do is fill that cup up with information, right? Every time we fill it up even a little bit more, people are like, the cup is filled. Someone has figured out analytics as it relates to this. I actually think what's happening is the cup is a lot bigger in many regards, and it's a lot just different in terms of its filling rate, right? To where...
I was going to say, are we on screen?
I think we should be.
Yeah. Oh, we have tons of battery left. So I was getting worried.
So I think it's that this cup is left a lot more to be filled. So what Amazon actually has data on is in itself could be a worrisome thing could be about this is that it's confirmation bias on its own thing. It's actually not showing the dynamicisms of Cooper, right? It's only showing that Cooper, when he watches Elmo, really gets into Elmo and wants to watch more things related to Elmo, right? It's data and it's a computer, so it can't ask, is too much Elmo good for Cooper? And why, right? Or should there be a point where someone says, I want to dye all dogs purple, that we say, maybe not. That's a bad idea, right? And how do you do data research on those things as well to say, yeah, there's some value. What these things are doing can very much tell you about what is happening. It can predict on things that have happened before and kind of tell you predictive information from that, right? But it's not asking a hierarchical question on what is this good in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
To then go through this and say, well, you know, when people, one data analytic question, there are people searching for how to dye all dogs purple. 2, when they search for dogs that are purple, they are more than likely T-Mobile customers, right? And when they're T-Mobile customers, and not to pick on T-Mobile, but when they're T-Mobile customers, they also live in Hawaii or something. Not picking on Hawaii, just random example, right?
Okay.
So nowhere along here have we asked, is that even valuable? Like, is that like a thing that people should be seeking out? Is that is like the best good of the universe, or is this something?
Well, I guess because that's subjective, right?
It is subjective.
Who's to say, you know?
But the person that needs to know that question the most is caught in the whirlwind of purple dogs, right?
Right.
They're not given enough context. Sometimes I would make this case, I would argue this case, that their life is in a vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
right? They don't see much, they don't hear much. In this way, they're much like the Carl person, right?
Right.
Where it's like, I don't know about this too much. I'm not that concerned. I found a girlfriend who likes to also dye dogs purple because we met on a small group. I have friends that they also want to dye all dogs purple, right? My life makes sense now, right? And you're like, okay, right? That's the bigger question from where we go from here, right? And I think it's partially why you see a lot of friction amongst people now, is because to a certain extent, you are in place of, you're in a vacuum. You're only being shown things that support the things that the data model says that you would like. So you're not given much context outside of that, so you can't really see, is this good for me or is this not good for me? If I wanted to lose weight, right, they would say fat guys, right, need to be shown more TGI Fridays, not enough exercise equipment. Or they should be shown exercise equipment, but we kind of know what happens with fat guys. They don't lose weight, right? Or something like that. There's nothing in there that says, well, how do we actually help?
So here's another question jumping in right there. Has the algorithm forsaken humanity? Basically, it's like, it's not trying to save humanity. Like you say, show them the equipment, not the food. They're just trying, like, it's all about what they want from you, which is ultimately money, I guess.
Well, see, I think this goes to your bigger question. Who's the bigger mind, right?
Right.
The bigger minds in that space aren't actually bigger minds. They're bigger companies, right? And those companies have profit margins that they have to make. They have profit lines that they gotta invest in. Mm-hmm. They have to succeed from a business sustainability standpoint.
Oh, damn, you hit me with what I was saying. It's not the people, it's not the company, it's not the algorithm, it's the people in charge of it, right?
Well, it's a and I mean, I think you've seen this sometimes with, I read something this week where a Facebook engineer left and said that they're profiting off of hate, right? And he alleges all these things. It's like, you were still kind of working there, right? But okay. So if they're profiting off of hate, how are they profiting off of hate? They're profiting off of hate because there's probably hate groups, and those hate groups need stuff to feed the monster, right? There's nothing being shown to the hate groups that says, in context, like, you're kind of wrong about some of these things, or the universal nature of this, and what they get the hype behind is saying, well, that's not my job. I'm not a bigger mind. I'm a bigger business, right? You just think I'm a bigger mind, or the way this is set up is for you to figure out whether you're a bigger mind.
Tying back to what we didn't get on camera, when we were talking, when I was bringing up Lucy, like, because I remember I was going to go into that about the whole time theory that she has in that, or just, you know, when she starts dropping knowledge to everyone. But I was just thinking about why people do stuff like that, as far as like saying, oh, the platform's hateful or whatever. She was saying in the movie, Scarlett Johansson, that people have a tendency, in order to satisfy their own, like humanity, in order to satisfy their own ego, they reduce a lot of things down to being like isolated as in one. So it's not so much as that they see all the inner working parts of Jeff Bezos, Amazon, the employees there, the people working with the data and all this.
Right.
They just see Amazon, or they see Jeff Bezos.
Right.
What is Jeff Bezos doing about, blah, 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 and, why isn't he donating or stuff? Like, he is Amazon, right?
Right.
And people have this tendency to reduce things down to just this one thing so they can point the finger, because that's how they deal with things in the world, it seems like. So when it's like Facebook is profiting off of hate and they're showing us these information and everything, it's like the part where it says in context is there because it's providing that this article is written by this person, right? That is your context.
Right.
That this person wrote this based on everything that they have observed of the world.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
They didn't come back from God and say, here's what's up. This is their experience.
Right.
That's the context. You talk about critical thinking.
Right.
That shows you the context. But it's easier for a person to just consolidate that down to one thing and say Facebook.
Well, see, I would back up a little bit, right? So, at the point where that article comes out and it's written by Boba Fett, right?
Okay.
Boba Fett writes this article and you're like, oh my God, he's this guy. Is he the authority on this, or is he Boba Fett, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's also this idea, there's a theory out there in philosophy that says people are very inclined to go into mimetic theory, right? Mimetic practice, where if we're friends, we have to like the same things, we have to be about the same things, we're mostly aligned with each other.
Okay.
Because in a weird place, it's like confirmation bias amongst each other, right? So it gets all weird. There's a bunch of crazy stuff that happens in mimetic theory, by the way, right? It's stuff that's like, mimetic theory is the cause of most friction in the world. This is a crazy summarization. I'm trying to remember back from like 2010, 2011, when I was like deep into this type of stuff. But it was like, what ends up happening is, if I get a girlfriend, and I want my friends to confirm that I've chosen the right person, I then have to describe her in terms that my friends would like. But my friends are like me, so once I describe her, they will also probably like her as well. But there's only one of her, so we either share her or one of us has her and the other one doesn't. And then what we start to go through is mimetic rivalry, where it's like a one-upsmanship allocated on limited resources, right? Trying to convince her that she is either with the best option out of both of us, right? It's weird. It gets really weird, but it's fascinating stuff. So what I feel like probably happens in regards to this is you don't care if Boba Fett is from God, blessed as the biggest mind, is a best practice author or anything like that. You don't care about any of that stuff because he has said something that speaks to you, right? And you're like, I need to feel like how I feel about this is right? So in order to do that, I have to give some validity to Boba Fett, who's writing this article, right? Because if Boba Fett is incorrect, then I'm wrong, and I don't want to be wrong. I want to be right.
I'm not ready to deal with that responsibility.
I mean, think about it. I think about it. I've seen all these videos of people that normally wouldn't regard themselves as racist, right? Regarding certain things like, I don't want my children to learn this troubled history of America. That's not our history. That's not who we are. We could put it in more positive terms. And it's like, why don't you want to deal with this? If we're saying that the best state for everyone is to know all the context for something and to make an educated statement on what that is, then why wouldn't you want them to know about that? And to some regards, maybe inner-workingly, this is problematic for the person that's like, I don't want to have to admit to some degree that my status is not related to my hard work, right? Or my.
And that's understandable.
And that's like someone coming through and being like, you're rich and you think you're an entrepreneur. You're actually had a head start way ahead of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, just like no basketball player wants to hear they're only good at basketball because they're black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about like Caster Semenya.
You missed me. What was that?
So Caster Semenya, I hope I pronounced her name correctly, the big track star.
Alright.
She is going through, so she was born different than most females, where her genetic makeup makes her produce more masculinity, I think, or something.
Testosterone?
Yes, testosterone than normally.
Okay.
So she doesn't look like an average female runner. She doesn't act like a normal female runner, and she's openly gay, and she's just different than what your traditional track star maybe looks like, acts like, on all that, right?
Okay.
So she's been beating these people hardcore because she's a good runner. She runs extremely fast. To the point where the regulatory committee here came back and said, we want to look all in her. She had to do like all these investigations into her body, into her makeup, and then they embarrassed her and put her out there and said, well, she wasn't born fully female or something like that, and she has a one-up on her, right? And now they've made it to where if she wants to run in a race, in her races that she normally runs, right, she has to take pills to lower her testosterone to compete against other women in the field, which is crazy, right? So here's that like, whether you were born, if you were a little bit ahead of the pack to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very fascinating concept. Now, complicate this. Now, apply some shades to this, right? People parallel Caster against Michael Phelps, right? Michael Phelps was born unusually tall. His wingspan is unusually tall. He's double jointed ankles, so he could swim a lot. And people don't apply those same regulatory things to Michael Phelps.
Yeah.
But he's closer to Aquaman than he is to your normal Wayne Lochte, right? Who competed against him but didn't have these things, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, sometimes that's hard for people to hear. If someone came up to Michael Phelps and said, yeah, you got all these gold medals, man. But I mean, honestly, look at you. You were supposed to, right?
Yeah.
Does that take away from it? Does it squander it? How does that? I
think public opinion can be very overruling in situations like that.
Yeah.
No one comes at Michael Jordan for having big hands.
Right.
Because it's like, well, having big hands isn't really that big of a deal, and
right.
we just like seeing you do the things you do with those
right.
hands,
Right.
So, like, people make it okay. Like, the judge, the jury makes it okay.
Right.
So some committee out there said it wasn't okay for this chick to be busting ass the way she's busting ass.
Right.
When really it's just a physical advantage. She was birthed with, just like Phelps has his double jointed, or Michael has big hands to control a ball, or Wilt Chamberlain is huge. It's just what you would be fortunate enough to win through the genetic ladder.
And it's crazy that they're targeting her testosterone, but it's not clear that that's what's leading her to be a better runner. It could just be that she's a better runner.
Yeah, I'm like, just because you have some physical advantage doesn't mean you're like people are. Like, it's as old as the Bible, David versus Goliath.
Right.
People can still triumph over people who just naturally, the whole hard work versus gifted, you can still overcome that. So, just to be frankly, someone's being a pussy about that whole thing. Like, she keeps winning. It's not fair. It's like someone's going with the whole it's not fair route, and they've made it a lot bigger than it needs to be.
Well, I mean, this is where we're at in 2020, right?
Well, see, here's the. I heard somebody talking about the problem with giving everyone a voice, like through social media, like Twitter.
Right.
it used to, like, it's like things are pretty much the same as they always been, but now everyone has a voice.
Right.
And it creates these, like, dynamics and opinions that are a little, like, sensationalized. And it's like, yeah, because there's absolutely, just hearing, I don't know the whole thing,
right.
but I'm like, just hearing that, it sounds like, look, she's just better at running because she's just born to run.
Right.
Like, people say that all the time. They were born to do this.
Right.
You know, Robert Downey Jr. was born to play Tony Stark.
Right.
You can't help it if he's just really good at being Tony. Like,
right.
you could say, like, maybe Tom Cruise was sour. He didn't get the role. But it's just like, he just is a better fit. It's just how it goes.
I mean, I think it is interesting, though, like, whether we should, if every voice should be heard, because I'm suspectful that, yeah, they should be heard. But the challenge is, if we're giving people the right gasoline, the right inputs to correctly frame their outputs, right?
And it goes like, in one of my other podcasts with Gevian in Chicago, I was like, I don't think people are built to handle, they're just not equipped to handle that much input.
Right.
And when you have social media, you have all these millions of voices coming into you, a lot of people can't deal with that. Like I said, it's a lot easier just to hear from people I already agree with.
Right.
When you start hearing so many different opinions come in on you, it's just like, it becomes, they're not built to handle that. People are only supposed to be interacting. Like, let's just say, go back a couple hundred years, we would only be interacting about maybe 20, 40 people tops in our village, right?
Right.
That's what we are genetically built to handle. Our minds have developed, though, into a way to where, you know, technology has brought us to a place where we're used to developing more, but still, a lot of people only deal with about maybe a handful of people, because that's just what you're built to deal with.
Right.
And when you start putting in social media, it's too much.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's too much or if it's just that we haven't given people the frame to be able to think through that stuff, right? Which is difficult. It's granted, it's difficult. But it's also, to say that to a certain extent gives people an out to say, I don't have to subscribe to otherisms, right? They're not like me, then I don't care because they're not part of my circle, right? But there's injustices kind of happening here, right?
Yeah.
And if we want people to care about the injustices of the world, then it's almost like saying, and this is a weird subversion of this, but it's like, Black Lives Matter. They do, right? They inherently do. We want people to understand that Black Lives Matter, right? We want people to understand that these injustices don't make sense at any level of observation. These things don't make sense. And if you could just be open to hearing this and coming at it from a frame of word, then maybe you could understand that too, right? The frustration with that is that to move this needle forward in social justice, not just Black Lives Matter, but things that are happening in China with Hong Kong and Chinese rule of people and people's liberation and all this different types of stuff, right? Stuff across the board that is very difficult for people to understand. Social justice is not just happening in America, it's all around, right?
Yeah. Slavery is still popping in some places.
These things must be addressed, right? Is that it requires the people that do not care to care. And they can't just say, it's too complicated, right?
Yeah. Because
the people that are still being impacted by this also would like to say, this is too complicated. Why am I being like unjustly vilified or
it's like, and then they say, well, why don't you just leave?
Right.
Well, I'm trying to come in America. Well, you slow down, okay? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's unfortunate. I think to a certain extent, it has been very difficult for people to say, how do I grapple with that, right? Like, there's been all these cases of people of Mexican descent being kicked out of America and saying, I'm not Mexican, I'm American. Right? Like, I grew up in America. I don't know Mexico, right? How should I reassimilate, or how should I align these identities, right? And this has been talked about for ages, right? How does an African American look at themselves in context of where they are at in the nation today, right? Mm-hmm. Your forefathers, our ancestors, have built this country. Literally built it. Not from like a Jeff Bezos planning standpoint, right? Not from a regulatory Supreme Court practices, laws, and all of that. They literally built this country, right? To be then said, if you don't like it, leave, is kind of like, I built the damn store. Now you're telling me I'm fired from it, right? You know what I mean? Like that's rough for a lot of people to align with. But it's also true that it feels like you're never gonna get a fair shake, right? Mm-hmm. Or a fully fair shake. Or the people that want you to get a fair shake are having trouble making the case for people stopping from giving the fair shake too. And it's like, how is this supposed to happen, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of this frustration comes from. But it's challenging. It's one of those things that you cannot not address, right? And how do you move forward? How do you move that forward?
Unfortunately, or I'm only saying unfortunately because that's not true. I've always prescribed to the whole, it's like that's not my fight, so to speak. Like I'm a cartoonist. What I work on is how to become a successful cartoonist. That's my journey. That's my fight. Trying to turn that into a livable, career and everything where I can provide for myself and my family, right? That's my fight. That's my Rubik's Cube. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like such things as like you're free to do what you want. Things like that allow that to be a thing. And then when it comes, there's a lot of shit going down in Somalia. There's all of these injustices in China. There's horrible living conditions in Japan. There's still some slavery happening in Libya. There's all these things, and it's like, sure, if you ask me, I don't think those things are cool. I think something should be done about those things. Am I actually gonna do it? I don't want to. It's just straight up, I don't want to. Right. And that's from a very privileged standpoint, because I get to say, I don't want nothing to deal with it. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not gonna say it's unfortunate, because I'm actively doing what I want to do. It's just what I want to do. It's fucked up. It's the world we live in, but it's super fucked up that you have people who will be born into privilege, whether it's just being in America, whether it's being rich, whatever it is. You're gonna be born into a situation that you get to set your own terms with, and it's unfortunate that other people aren't given that.
I don't think there's one standard way to impact all those injustices, and I think it's careful to separate out from like the Superman complex. Like you don't need to fix everything everywhere, right? But it's what can you do to make the world a better place, right? And that's the best you can hope for, right? Mm-hmm. Is my thing on making the world a better place. I'm not some engineer. I'm not Jeff Bezos. I don't have billions and billions and billions of dollars. Right. I can't afford a small army of people to go correct this stuff out. And one, I don't know if that's probably the best way. Like I'm probably way too ignorant of all the nuances of this. Mm-hmm. But I want the world to be a better place, and where I can make the world a better place, I will do what I can.
And there was this girl I used to talk to where she would get a little harp on me a bit. I was like, quick sidebar, I was very proud to be able to use that word just there. Right. I don't use that word a lot, and I was like, this is the moment.
Now is my moment.
I'm gonna use the word harp because it super fits, and I never used it like I fucking nailed it. Right. Anyways,
harp, it's the word of the day.
She used to harp on me about not being more conscious about racial injustice and stuff like that, because I was just a lot more concerned about trying to feed my machine. And I'm like, I do what I can in my own ways, like you're saying. I'm like, something I feel like a lot of other black cartoonists do is that they'll get so caught up in the idea that they're a black cartoonist, is that they only do black. Like, they said, well, they only make comics about white people in Marvel DC. I'm going to make comics just about black people. I'm like, kind of cool, you know? Yeah, you provide that identity and, you know, all that good stuff, representation. But then you're just doing the exact same thing they did. And it's like, it's cool, but it's not working towards something better. In my opinion, I don't think it's working towards something better. I try to just make stories without concern for what skin color they are. Well, their skin tone is irrelevant to me. I'll see a character and it's like, it makes sense if they're white. I see a color, it makes sense if they're black. Right. And that's just how I operate. I think that's a more healthy way of operating when you're just more so making stories, and it doesn't matter what skin tone people are. But she said that's just how I want to do it. That's how I want to so-called affect change. Just the people I interact with, I show them, hey, not all black people are, you know, thugs or whatever the fuck, you know, you might have been fed on the news. I just try to interact with people in a very healthy, friendly way. And, but, you know, there's some people that's not enough.
Right. I mean, I think it's definitely interesting because I think you run into these places where one of the lines that could come out of that is, yeah, but I mean, a majority of the comics that have been out there have been unoriginal in ideas, right? Mm-hmm. They've kind of just taken something over here and said, we'll just do it over here. And they've made millions and millions of dollars, billions, trillions that probably have funneled through by movies, comic books, media, just that is replicating one thing after another. That could be said of, maybe that's not as problematic because it's the volume of representation that needs to get out there. There's also this idea that, yeah, maybe original stories should be different, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe representation needs to look a little bit different from all lenses, right? And I think that's the individual navigation that you're talking about. Is like, I don't know about all that, right? Like, to put that on yourself could be the heavy side of like, so am I supposed to become an expert in this if I just wanted to draw cartoons, right? But I also think it also still opens you up to the door of interpretation, right? Which is, as soon as you put art out there, it will be interpreted.
Right.
You as artists will be interpreted. That comes along with the territory of being an artist, right? So having a way of navigating those waters is a very individualistic journey that some people are going to say, representation, that's what I'm all about. Other people might say, different.
And it's like, that's cool, you know? Like, the problem is when people start trying to, like, anytime, like, when someone is trying to tell someone else how to think, I think it's like, okay, slow down. Anytime, it's like, no matter what it is, like, even if you're trying to tell a Nazi, that's super bad for you to do that, like, you just to impose your will. It's like, you can't just tell someone something. Have a conversation with somebody, even someone you think is very evil and corrupt. It's like,
I don't know, man.
If you,
I don't know.
Like,
Man.
I mean, that was an extreme, like, dude with a Nazi soldier with a gun at you. But I mean, in a more chill situation, someone that you don't agree with, it's not fair for you to just say that's not right, because you're not the authority on things. No matter what it is, you're just another person. It's better to have a conversation.
But there is a point to where if you know something's wrong, right? Yeah. You should say something.
I mean, killing people will never be right. Like, anyone who tries to defend any of that stuff that happens,
I don't know.
Black Lives Matter, it's like,
I don't know. If you could go back and kill a mass killer, right?
Okay, we've had conversations about time travel before, and you know just your experience with fiction, you know the ramifications of time travel.
I get it. I get it.
Honestly, would you go back and stop? Straight up kill. Well, yeah, we'll just say stop a mass shooting from happening.
I mean, I think about the whole Thanos part, right, with Marvel, and when Don Cheadle's like, why don't we just go back and find maybe Thanos? And
it's like time travel doesn't work like that. Yeah.
Like, you don't know how time travel works, right?
Yeah.
You don't also know. So I think I've always run this balancing act on where I think I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm also somewhat science and grounded too, right? And there's say you do get the chance to go back in time, and there is no one looking on baby Thanos, right? And you're like, I could just, you know, and then get up out of here, right? Maybe the whole point of me being here was something being led to you is you're supposed to do that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, fortunately, there are no time travel machines, but I also think about the moral weight of that on someone's shoulders, right? And the only thing that I can say is, the only parallels that I've ever seen for something like that, right, is this documentary called The Fog of War, going back to Vietnam and like everything that happens. And it's like the fog of war is way more complicated than what your average viewer looks at, right? And they have this example of these guys flying planes where they were supposed to like gun down these people, and like so many percentage times over, they'd say, oh, something's wrong with the crosshairs, I wasn't able to shoot at them. Or my shots are misaligned, and then we go back and look at it and be like, there's nothing wrong with your plane. It's that people didn't want to do this harm, right? It's difficult to navigate that, right? It's also said that if you had the chance to come up to somebody really bad, like I think about if you had the chance to stop 9/11 from happening, right? And maybe if you don't know if it will be successful or not, right? But you're sitting there, somehow you hear the guys planning this, and you have the chance to say something, right? Like you're overhearing their conversation, outside of just minding your own business, you say, people will die, and this isn't okay, right? That's not okay, right? It's going to lead to all this casualties, and you don't know where these things will go from here, right? If you could say something, why wouldn't you just say something? Even if that person could come back and be like, you're not the authority of me, right? I mean, you would at least, I think that's my moral line, right? Is to say, I gotta say something, right? I just cannot not say something. And I could be wrong, I'm human, right? I cannot be the authority, and I can recognize that. But I also need to, where you see wrong, say wrong, right? Instead of just, not my problem, right?
Yeah, I guess, because, see, we're dealing with an extreme of death right now. And that's a lot easier to just say, well, yeah, you shouldn't do that. It's right. Like, at no point does it make sense to be like, oh, yeah, kill him. You have to be in some extreme situations.
Well, I mean, think about it like this, okay? And I love thought experiments. I love thought experiments, right? So, to degradations, there's different ones that work differently, right? But would you stop a friend from drunk driving home?
Yeah.
You're not the authority of that.
Right.
Why would you stop them from doing that?
Okay. What would be feeling like if they said, if I was like, you probably shouldn't drive, right?
Right.
He comes back with, I'm fine, or I've done it before, or something. I would be like, chances are you're going to get into an accident or get pulled over. Either way, you're going to be in a shitty predicament, so you really shouldn't do it, right?
Right.
And that's where I come in of saying a conversation.
Right.
We're just saying, dude, don't drink. Like, there's some people who won't explain themselves. They'll just be like, don't drink and drive. No, give me your keys. Don't drink and drive. No.
Yeah.
Like, I know what's best for you.
That's me.
Yeah, and it's like...
That's probably me that's like this. What happened to you? You lost your keys? I have your keys in my pocket.
Yeah.
Where are your keys? I don't know. Well, I guess you can't drive, man.
Yeah, so...
Sucks, man, because you're drunk. You shouldn't drive.
Yeah.
Drive drunk.
But see, that's a lot more preemptive versus like, okay, let me just go ahead and get his keys, hide his keys from him because I don't want him getting into... That's a more preemptive strike, that's also a good idea,
right.
In that situation versus you just telling him, no, you're not going to drive, give me your keys, or just straight up take them from him.
But I could do that too.
Yeah, it's like, and yeah, I was saying, there's so many ways to approach a situation.
Right.
All this shit is super subjective and it's very circumstantial, unfortunately. So there is no just straight up book unless you're dealing in those extremes.
Now here's another one, right?
Okay.
Carts at Publix, right? Shopping carts, right?
These family man problems.
No, like shopping carts. You pull into the parking lot, right?
Okay.
You see your friend in Publix. You guys both leave out at the same time.
Okay.
Right? As you guys are walking back to your car, right? You see them unloading their stuff, and they're about to leave the shopping cart right there. Do you tell them to put the shopping cart in the bin?
Okay, it depends on what kind of person you are. If it's or really like for me personally, like let's just get specific because it obviously could depend based on the person. So me personally, I'd be like, hey, like I would say something. I'd be like, you gonna put up your shopping cart? Like if I'm within speaking range, hey, you gonna put up your shopping cart, man?
Right.
And typically my friends will go like either like, I'm not gonna do that or something. And if it's something I really like, something that's really stretched according to me, I'll be like, dude, put the shopping cart back. You shouldn't just leave it out here like that. All these things happen from you doing that.
Right.
You know, sometimes they'll, you know, it just really just depends on how strongly I feel about it to where I want to make what they're doing my problem. So it's like, cause again, it's just, I'm on my own journey. Like that's his journey to leave shopping carts in parking lots, you know, with heavy traffic. It makes sense to him for some reason. My journey is just doing my thing, and it's like, oh, I see him on his journey, and it's like, what the fuck? Hey, you probably shouldn't do that. And it's like, but how much is it affecting me? It's not. And it's like, okay, how much do I want to make this part of my life? And that's subjective. Shopping cart, depending on how full the parking lot is, I will either go move it for him and put it in, like the thing's right there. I could roll it over it.
Right.
If you're not gonna do it, whatever, fuck. If it's like, it's right there. If I look around, I don't see the thing, or it's like maybe 3 rows over to like, you know, like the little aisles that they have out there in the parking lot. If it's like 3 rows over, if it's not really a lot of people out here today, okay. You know, it's like, it's whatever.
It's interesting because the shopping cart thought experiment is a very interesting one because it's also used to understand how self-regulation works for a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. There are no laws demanding that you put back the shopping cart, right? There's no regulatory body. And you could argue that there's whole economics behind leaving the shopping cart out there, or at least going to retrieve the shopping carts. That's someone's job, right? Mm-hmm. There's whole machines dedicated to this at some places that grab the shopping carts and bring them in.
And I say that when I'm in stores sometimes I don't feel like putting something back when I realize I'm not going to buy it. It's like, it's someone's job. I'm making their life more interesting by just putting it right here versus where it belongs.
Well, you're making it like a treasure hunt.
Yeah.
Marshmallows.
Like,
who put marshmallows by the meats?
But it happens all the time. Yeah, it happens all the time.
So it's like one of those self-regulatory things. They're like, if people were, and this is again one of those libertarian type of questions on how much regulation is good regulation, or if regulation is good inherently at all. But it's like, do people always put the carts back, right? Because if they don't, why? They're right there. Oh, I think it's gonna die soon.
No, that's my phone. I guess Danielle put it down here. Oh, but it is about to die soon. We need to wrap up. Hold on.
So it's just like one of those things where it's like, if you would put those back, then it might be easier for all this to get done, right? Because no one's asking you to. But yet and still, people are like, I don't want to do it.
All right.
So.
Well, we unfortunately have to wrap it up. Someone's looking for me, and the battery's dying. It's a good point to stop. So I just want to say thanks, Cary, for having a conversation. Cary Claiborne, Georgia State. What's your official title?
Associate Director, Student Success. Student Success.
You know, yeah.
Good stuff.
So take that label and then compare it to everything you've been talking about. It makes sense. So I appreciate it, and thanks for watching. Y'all have a nice day.
Bye.